What is the price of truth? For one woman, it was her life. She vanished after finding a secret a town's most powerful man would kill to protect. For 18 years, the only clue was a single feather, dismissed by police as nothing. Stay with me to discover how that one impossible detail brought a killer to justice. Some mysteries don't begin with a scream. They begin with an absence, a quiet tear in the fabric of a normal day. In Port Fathom, Washington, a town perpetually wrapped in the soft gray gauze of coastal fog, absence was a local trade. The fog had a way of erasing things: the line of the horizon, the tops of the ancient Douglas firs, and, on a Tuesday in October of 2004, a 30.4-year-old county archivist named Eleanor Vance. She was meticulous, a woman who lived her life by the Dewey Decimal System, and she vanished somewhere on the 16-mile stretch of winding road between the Historical Society and her small, neat home. Her car, a sensible sedan, was found parked on the shoulder, keys in the ignition, her purse untouched on the passenger seat. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood. It was a disappearance so clean, so total, it felt less like a crime and more like a quiet departure. The initial investigation was thorough but fruitless. The search parties combed the dense, dripping woods until the mud sucked at their boots and their hope. But in the final evidence log, logged as Item 7 and deemed non-probative, was a single, overlooked detail. Found on the driver's side floor mat, almost hidden beneath the brake pedal, was one small feather. It was a flash of impossible color in the gray gloom of the case. A vibrant, iridescent blue-black, sharp as a shard of obsidian. It was dismissed as random debris, a stray piece of the wild world tracked into the car. For 18 years, it would lie in an evidence bag, a forgotten question mark in a case that had long since grown cold, a story the fog itself seemed determined to swallow. The silence that began that Tuesday afternoon would become the most haunting sound Port Fathom had ever known. It settled over the town like the fog, dampening everything, seeping into the cracks of everyday life. The case file for Eleanor Vance became a monument to that silence. It documented a life of quiet order, abruptly meeting a wall of profound mystery. For the investigators, every answer was like a knife made of fog. You could feel the edge, but never see the blade. They looked for enemies and found none. They searched for secrets and found only a woman who paid her bills on time and returned her library books early. The forest on either side of that road was ancient, a place where sunlight struggled to touch the ground. The trees stood like patient sentinels, their branches clawing at the gray sky like desperate fingers. They held the secrets of that day, but they would not speak. It was as if the landscape itself had conspired in her vanishing. The earth gives back what it takes, they say, but this forest was different. This forest wasn't finished. It still held her. And in an evidence locker, gathering dust, a single feather waited. It was a fragment of a story no one yet knew how to read, a piece of the truth that had fallen unnoticed into the dark. It was the only thing left of Eleanor Vance that refused to be silent. It was a promise, sharp and vibrant, that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising to the surface. And one day, it would make the entire town listen. To understand the silence Eleanor Vance left behind, you must first understand the life she so carefully curated. She was not a woman of grand passions or loud declarations. She was a creature of detail and quiet order, a person who found comfort in the steady accumulation of facts. As the head archivist for the Port Fathom Historical Society, her domain was a quiet sanctuary of silence, defined by the scent of old paper and decaying leather, the gentle rustle of delicate documents being coaxed from manila folders. She believed that history wasn't in the grand narratives of victory and defeat, but in the margins, in the property deeds, the shipping manifests, the forgotten letters of long-dead pioneers. To her, the truth was a mosaic, assembled from 1,000 tiny, overlooked pieces. Her colleagues described her as intensely private, but deeply kind, a woman who could spend an entire afternoon cross-referencing 19th century census data to help a resident trace their family tree, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a microfilm reader. She treated every query, no matter how small, with a solemn respect, because she understood that every life, every story, mattered. The past wasn't gone. It had just been quiet, and it was her job to help it speak. Her younger brother, Liam, saw a different side of her meticulous nature. He, a restless soul who drifted through jobs and towns, was the chaotic counterpart to her stability. To him, Eleanor was the anchor of their family, the unmoving center of his world after their parents passed. While he lived in the swirling present, she was the keeper of their shared memories. She remembered the name of his childhood dog, a scruffy terrier named Gus. She remembered the date of his first broken bone, a fall from a bicycle when he was 8. She even remembered the specific shade of cornflower blue of their mother's favorite vase. Her mind was an archive of their lives, and without her, he felt adrift, a story with no one left to tell it. Her small apartment above a quiet bookstore was a testament to her nature. It was a shrine of quiet hope and painful memory, even before she vanished. Books were organized not just by author, but by publication year. Her collection of antique maps was cataloged with a precision that bordered on obsession. She was a cartographer of time, a person who believed that if you gathered enough data points, you could chart a clear and predictable course through anything. The brutal irony was that her own life would end at a single, unmappable point on a lonely road. The woman who lived by the index was gone, leaving behind a mystery that had no table of contents, no footnotes, and no answers. The chaos she had so carefully held at bay had finally broken through, swallowing her whole and leaving nothing but a profound, unending silence in its place. The first 72 hours following Eleanor's disappearance were a flurry of organized panic. The Port Fathom Sheriff's Department, led by the weary, near-retirement Detective Frank Harding, initiated a full-scale search. A BOLO alert was issued for Eleanor and her vehicle, her name and license plate number crackling over police radios, a digital ghost already haunting the airwaves. Her car was found within hours by a deputy on routine patrol, and its location created the first chilling question of the case. It was pulled over neatly, almost politely, on the gravel shoulder of the forest road, as if she had stopped for a routine traffic infraction or to admire the view, a view completely obscured by the ever-present suffocating fog. There were no foreign fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Forensics vacuumed the interior, collecting fibers, dust, and the single anomalous feather. Canine units were brought in, their hopeful barks quickly turning to confused whines. The trail went cold just 20 feet from the driver's side door, dissolving into the damp earth and the confusing tapestry of scents in the old-growth forest. It was as if she had simply stepped out of her car and been lifted away, evaporating into the mist. Detective Harding, a man who had seen decades of human tragedy, interviewed everyone. He spoke with her colleagues at the Historical Society, who described a woman dedicated to her work, not prone to spontaneity. He interviewed the few friends she kept, who painted a picture of a quiet, contented life. And he sat with her brother, Liam, who had arrived in a frantic, sleepless haze from 3 states away, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The interviews yielded nothing. Eleanor had no known enemies, no secret lovers, no hidden deaths. Her life, as far as anyone could see, was as clean and ordered as the archives she so lovingly kept. As days bled into weeks, the official search wound down. The news crews, having wrung all the drama they could from the story of the missing archivist, packed up their vans and moved on. The town's collective fear, a sharp and urgent spike, slowly subsided into a quiet, lingering sorrow, another ghost to add to Port Fathom's collection. The case faded into local lore. For Detective Harding, the Eleanor Vance case became a source of quiet, personal frustration. It was a file left perpetually open on the corner of his desk, a silent rebuke to his long career. He'd stare at the evidence log, the short, stark list of mundane items that refused to add up to anything. Purse, keys, wallet. And then, at the bottom, the single piece of evidence that felt like a taunt. Item 7. Single avian feather, dark blue-black, non-probative. He knew it meant nothing. It was debris. But in the quiet of his office, with the rain lashing against the windows, the file's silence felt like a low hum of static he could never quite tune out, the last unsolved mystery he would carry with him into retirement. Time is the enemy of a cold case. It is a slow, relentless acid that erodes evidence, fades memories, and buries the truth under silent layers of new tragedies and daily life. The file for Eleanor Vance, case number PF.04.881, was officially shelved in 2006, stamped with the bureaucratic finality of inactive. Detective Harding retired a year later, handing off a cardboard box of unsolved cases to his successor with a weary sigh of resignation. In that box, Eleanor's file was just one of many sorrows. For the town of Port Fathom, the story of the missing archivist slowly transformed. It became a piece of local folklore, a cautionary tale whispered to teenagers about the dangers of the winding forest roads after dark, a ghost story told around campfires. The sharp edges of the tragedy were worn smooth by the years until only a myth remained. But for Liam Vance, time did not heal. It sharpened his grief into a single, obsessive point. He could not leave. To leave Port Fathom would be to leave her behind, to accept the silence. He stayed, taking a menial job at the local high school, his once drifting life shrinking to fit the rigid contours of his sister's absence. He became the unofficial keeper of her case, an unwavering seeker in a world that had moved on. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests until the county clerk knew him by name and would simply hand him the file with a sympathetic nod. He spent his evenings under the dim light of a desk lamp, poring over photocopies of the police reports, his highlighter bleeding through the cheap paper, as he marked and remarked every detail, searching for a pattern no one else could see. He memorized the evidence log, reciting it like a prayer. Item 1. Purse, beige leather, contents intact. Item 2. Keys, single ring, in ignition. Down the list he would go, his eyes always snagging on the last entry, the one that meant nothing to anyone else. Item 7. Single avian feather, dark blue-black, non-probative. To the police, it was litter. It was a random piece of the forest, meaningless debris. But to Liam, in the long, silent years of his vigil, it became a totem of memory, a symbol of the profound wrongness of it all. It was the only chaotic detail in his sister's meticulously ordered world, the one piece of impossible color in a life that had been rendered irrevocably gray. He carried the image of it in his mind, a sharp, obsidian splinter of hope. While the world forgot, Liam remembered, and he waited for the day the feather would finally tell its story. 18 years after Eleanor Vance was erased by the fog, a new detective was assigned to the Port Fathom Cold Case Unit. It was a role that was less of a position and more of a courtesy to the families of the forgotten, a place where old files went to die a second, quieter death. Detective Isabella Rossi was sharp, pragmatic, and had little patience for the town's ghost stories. To her, a cold case was a puzzle with missing pieces, a failure of logic, not a haunting. And Liam Vance, now a quiet, haunted man in his early 50s, was one of those ghosts. He requested a meeting, and Rossi reluctantly agreed, expecting another rambling, grief-fueled theory from a man broken by loss. Liam arrived at her small, cluttered office, carrying his worn, highlighted copies of the case file, a familiar sight to any cold case detective. But he also brought something new. It was an accidental breakthrough, the kind that reignites a case after long, silent years. In the process of finally cleaning out the last of his sister's belongings from a dusty storage unit, he had found a box of her professional research notes and queries related to her work at the archive. Tucked inside a brittle manila folder labeled Blackwood Grant 1922 was a photocopy of an old hand-drawn map. And there, in the margin, next to a faded notation about property lines, Eleanor had made a small, almost microscopic sketch. It was a drawing of a feather, rendered with an archivist's precision and an artist's eye for detail. It was unmistakably the same type of feather, the same shape, the same sharp elegance as the one found in her car. Rossi leaned forward, the professional boredom in her eyes replaced by a flicker of genuine electric curiosity. She took the map from Liam's trembling hands. For 18 years, the feather had been a dead end, a piece of random debris. Now it was a bridge. It was a deliberate clue left behind by a woman who lived and breathed details. The feather wasn't something that had been tracked into her car. It was something she had been studying. For the first time, a tangible thread appeared, connecting Eleanor's meticulous professional life to the chaos of her disappearance. This was no longer just a missing persons case. This was a story Eleanor herself had started to tell, and it was her own research, her own methodical mind, that was now reaching across the years, providing the first real lead. The silence was broken. The whisper from the archives was about to become a roar. The feather was the key. Detective Rossi, now fully invested, pulled the original evidence from storage, Item 7, sealed for 18 years. Under a microscope, the feather's unique structure was clear, its barbules catching the light in a flash of iridescent blue. She sent a high-resolution photo to an ornithologist at the University of Washington, who quickly identified it. It belonged to a Cyanocitta stellari, the Steller's jay. It's a common bird in the Pacific Northwest, but one with a fascinating reputation. They are known for their startling intelligence, their complex social structures, and most notably, for their ability to mimic the calls of other birds, including red-tailed hawks. They are the forest's sentinels, its tricksters, its gossips. A bird of secrets. Armed with this knowledge, Rossi and Liam returned to Eleanor's research, spreading the contents of the Blackwood grant folder across a table in the archives, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. The folder was about a piece of land deeded to the county in the 1920s by a reclusive and eccentric naturalist named Silas Blackwood. Blackwood, it turned out, had been a man obsessed with the region's bird populations, particularly the Steller's jays. His journals, which Eleanor had also been studying, were stored in the deepest part of the archive. They were filled with observations of the jay's behavior, which he described in almost human terms, as spies, messengers, and guardians of the forest. He wrote of their parliaments and their thefts, their morning calls and their warnings. Then they found the connection that made the air in the room grow cold. Silas Blackwood had vanished without a trace in the harsh winter of 1928, his disappearance attributed to the unforgiving wilderness. He was another ghost story, another name swallowed by the forest. Eleanor, it seemed, had developed a fascination with this parallel tragedy. She had been retracing his steps, studying his maps, following the ghost of a long-dead birdwatcher into the woods. The pattern was chilling. Two people, separated by nearly a century, both meticulous researchers obsessed with the same piece of land, had both walked into the Port Fathom woods and never walked out. The question was no longer just what happened to Eleanor. It was what secret was the forest keeping that had claimed them both. Eleanor Vance had not been researching a ghost story. She had been solving a geographic puzzle. The truth, as it so often does, was hiding in plain sight, buried in the careful cross-hatching of an old map. As Detective Rossi and Liam dug deeper into her notes, they realized her interest in Silas Blackwood was not historical, but intensely practical. She was using his century-old hand-drawn maps of Steller's jay nesting sites and comparing them with methodical precision to modern satellite surveys and county property records. This was Eleanor's gift. She could see the patterns that time had erased. Blackwood's maps were obsessively detailed, marking ancient trees, hidden streams, and rocky outcrops with a naturalist's intimate knowledge of the land. Eleanor, with her archivist's mind, had found a discrepancy, a small but significant tear in the official record. On Blackwood's 1922 map, there was a small 20-acre parcel of land deep within what was now the sprawling Olympic National Forest. It was a plot he had affectionately referred to in his journals as the Rookery. But on every modern map, county, state, and federal, that 20-acre parcel did not exist. It was a cartographic hole, a piece of land swallowed by shifting boundaries, faded ink, and 80 years of bureaucratic oversight. A ghost on the map. In the margin of her working copy, Eleanor had highlighted the area in yellow, and next to it, written in her small, neat script, was a single, chilling question. Where did it go? The question hung in the air of Rossi's office, a direct message from a woman 18 years gone. The realization was a punch to the gut. Eleanor hadn't been looking for a ghost. She had been looking for a piece of lost land. She was a woman who believed in order, in records that balanced, in maps that were true. An unaccounted-for 20 acres of earth would have been an intolerable error to her, an affront to the very principles by which she lived. She would have needed to correct it, to solve it. And whatever secret that land held, whatever was so valuable that someone would go to the trouble of erasing it from the map, Rossi now suspected was the secret that had cost Eleanor her life. The investigation had a new destination. They were no longer searching for a body in an endless forest. They were searching for a place that didn't exist. Following a path that was now 18 years cold felt like an act of faith. Using Eleanor's annotated maps, a modern GPS unit, and a healthy dose of grim determination, Detective Rossi and Liam Vance set out to find the Rookery. They left their vehicle where the paved road dissolved into a muddy, overgrown logging track, the kind of place where cell service goes to die. The deeper they went into the national forest, the more the world changed. The air grew heavy and damp, smelling of moss and decay and the deep, rich scent of earth that has gone undisturbed for centuries. Sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy of the old-growth trees, which rose like the pillars of a vast green cathedral, filtering the light into an eerie submarine gloom. The silence was absolute, a living thing that pressed in on them. It was broken only by the rhythmic drip of water from enormous fern fronds and the sharp snap of twigs under their boots. And then another sound, a harsh, scolding call that ripped through the quiet. Shack, 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 shack. A Steller's jay, a flash of cobalt and black, landed on a branch above them, its head cocked, watching. Then another answered, from a different direction. Soon it felt as though they were being followed, escorted by an invisible, chattering flock that moved with them through the trees. The sound was unnerving, a rising tide of avian anxiety. Liam, his face pale with exhaustion and dread, remembered a line his sister had once read to him from Silas Blackwood's journal. "The jays see all. They are the keepers of the forest's secrets. When a predator enters their woods, they sound the alarm. They do not stop until the threat is gone." The calls grew more agitated, more insistent, as they pushed further in, following the coordinates Eleanor had so carefully calculated. Rossi felt a shiver crawl down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold, damp air. She was a woman of logic, of evidence and facts. But here, in this ancient, watchful place, it was hard to ignore the feeling that they were trespassing. The calls of the jays felt like a warning, as if they were trying to turn them back, to steer them away from something ahead. Or, Rossi thought with a sudden, chilling clarity, perhaps they weren't warning them. Perhaps they were warning something ahead, that they were coming. The forest wasn't just old, it was watchful, and it did not want them here. After a grueling 6-hour hike, they found it. The GPS confirmed they were in a location that, according to every official map, simply did not exist. Before them, nearly swallowed by a tangle of overgrown rhododendron bushes and draped in thick, velvety moss, was a small, dilapidated cabin. It was Silas Blackwood's folly, his lost research outpost, a structure that hadn't been seen by human eyes in nearly a century. The door, its wood warped and swollen by decades of rain, creaked open into a scene from another time. A rusted wood-burning stove stood cold in one corner. A simple wooden table was littered with bird-watching journals still open, their pages turned to brittle, yellowed parchment by time and damp. Dust floated in the beams of their flashlights like snow caught in a photograph. But as their eyes adjusted to the gloom, they saw the anachronisms, the small, jarring details that screamed of a more recent presence. A newer-looking propane tank tucked beside the stove. A heavy-duty padlock, its steel still showing a faint gleam, on a large chest in the corner. And on the floor, scuffed into the thick layer of dust, the distinct, aggressive tread marks of a modern work boot. This was no historical relic. It was being used. Rossi's heart pounded in her chest. Her eyes scanned the small room, and behind a threadbare tapestry depicting a faded forest scene, she found the real secret. It was a heavy, reinforced cellar door flush with the floorboards. It was secured not with a simple, rustic latch, but with a modern, industrial deadbolt that was cold to the touch. With Liam's help, she used a pry bar from her pack and forced it open. The smell that rose from the darkness was stale and metallic, the scent of a place with no air and no hope.
In the narrow beam of her flashlight, they saw it. This was not a root cellar. This was a room. A small, soundproofed room with thick padding on the walls. In the center was a single iron cot with a thin, stained mattress. Beside it, a bucket, and on the concrete floor, dark, unsettling stains that no amount of time could fully erase. The truth was so much worse than anything they had imagined. This wasn't a research cabin. It was a trap. It was a cage. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was more monstrous than any ghost story. In the oppressive silence of the cellar, tucked into a small crevice in the concrete wall, was a small, waterproof box containing a wallet. The driver's license inside was brittle and faded, issued in 1998 to a young man named Kevin Miller, who had been reported missing from a neighboring county and never found. His case had been cold for over 20 years, another name swallowed by the indifferent passage of time. But it wasn't the wallet that made Liam's blood run cold and his breath catch in his throat. It was a faded Polaroid photograph tucked behind the license. It showed two men standing proudly in front of the cabin, their arms slung over each other's shoulders in a posture of camaraderie. One of them was Kevin Miller, his face young and full of life. The other was a younger but unmistakable version of a man they both knew. A man who was a titan in Port Fathom. Arthur Finch, the owner of the Finch Lumber Mill, a third-generation philanthropist whose family name was etched onto the stone facades of the library, the park, and the new wing of the county hospital. He was the chairman of the board for the Port Fathom Historical Society, the very man who had hired Eleanor Vance and publicly praised her meticulous work at town functions. He was a pillar of the community, a quiet, unimpeachable figure whose generosity was the stuff of local legend. And he was a monster. This is the most devastating twist in any investigation. Not the discovery of a stranger's evil, but the unmasking of a familiar face. Monsters aren't just found in basements. Sometimes they live in kitchens. Sometimes they sit on town boards. Sometimes they tuck you in at night. The Finch family, Rossi would later discover through a painstaking review of property records, had methodically bought up all the land surrounding the original Blackwood grant in the decades after Silas Blackwood vanished. They had created a fortress of private property around the hidden 20-acre parcel, effectively erasing it from public access and eventually from memory. Arthur Finch had known about the cabin his whole life. It was his family's secret, his inheritance, his private hunting ground. The arrest of Arthur Finch sent a seismic shock through Port Fathom, shattering the quiet town's perception of itself. He was the last person anyone would have suspected, a man whose name was synonymous with civic duty and quiet dignity. In the stark, white interrogation room, under the unflinching glare of fluorescent lights, the pillar crumbled. Confronted with the photograph and the evidence from the cabin, Finch confessed in a flat, emotionless voice. There was no denial, no outburst, only a chilling and complete resignation. The story he told was simple and brutal. Eleanor, in her quiet, diligent way, had put the pieces together. She had uncovered the cartographical anomaly of the rookery, and, by cross-referencing old mill records with county tax logs, a feat of archival detective work only she could have managed, she realized Finch was using the hidden land for the illegal logging of protected old-growth timber, a secret that had netted his family millions over the decades. She had gone to the cabin that afternoon to find definitive proof, likely expecting to find evidence of his financial crimes. Instead, she found something far worse. Evidence of the young man Kevin Miller, whom he had abducted and murdered years prior after the young man had stumbled upon the logging operation by accident. Eleanor confronted him. Finch didn't fly into a rage. He was, in his own words, disappointed. She had upset the perfect order of his life, the pristine separation he maintained between his public philanthropy and his private monstrosities. She had discovered his secret, and for that, she had to be erased. He took her from her car, drove her deep into the woods in his own truck, and ended her life. He buried her body near an ancient cedar tree, one that Silas Blackwood had meticulously marked on his map almost a century before. A final, sickening irony. And in a final, haunting detail, he confirmed the origin of the feather. As he forced a terrified Eleanor from her car on that lonely road, A panicked Stellar's jay that had somehow become trapped inside her vehicle flew out past his head, its frantic, scolding call echoing in the fog. It left a single feather behind, a tiny, vibrant blue witness to an act of profound darkness, a clue that would wait patiently for 18 years until someone finally understood its language. Following the precise directions given by a man devoid of remorse, a forensic recovery team made their way to the ancient cedar tree in the heart of the Lost Land. Liam Vance stood at the edge of the yellow police tape, watching the careful, methodical work, a silent counterpoint to the chaos that had consumed his life for nearly 2 decades. The air was still and heavy, the only sound the gentle scraping of shovels against the damp earth. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, even after years buried in the ground. The recovery was slow, respectful work. Each shovelful of dark, rich soil was treated with a reverence the killer had never shown. They found her. Eleanor Vance was finally coming home. The forensic evidence was overwhelming, corroborating every part of Finch's confession and linking him irrefutably to the earlier murder of Kevin Miller as well. Justice, in the cold, efficient sense of the word, was swift. Arthur Finch would die in prison, his name stripped from the buildings it once adorned, his family's legacy reduced to a footnote in the town's darkest chapter. The pillar of the community had become a monument to its own blindness. But for Liam, standing under the watchful canopy of the old-growth forest as they carried his sister away, there was no victory. There was no cathartic release. There was only a profound and hollow ache that settled deep in his bones. The mystery was solved, but the absence remained. The questions had been answered, but the silence was now permanent. The not knowing had been torture, but the knowing was a different kind of pain, a heavy, solid thing he would have to carry for the rest of his days. They say the earth gives back what it has taken, and in a way, it had. It had given back a story. It had given back a measure of truth. But it never returns what was truly lost. It doesn't return the years of stolen hope, the quiet conversations that were never had, or the steady, comforting presence of a sister who was the anchor of your world. The forest had surrendered its secret, but it kept the most important thing for itself. Some stories end not with closure, but with a quiet transformation. The trial of Arthur Finch forced the town of Port Fathom to confront the monster who had lived in its heart, a truth more terrifying and intimate than any local legend about the fog. In the wake of the verdict, Eleanor Vance was no longer remembered as a victim, a ghost story whispered on dark nights. She became the hero of her own story, the brilliant, meticulous archivist who had in death unearthed a truth no one else could find. Her legacy was not one of fear, but of diligence and quiet courage. Justice had been served, but it had come late, carved from stone and sorrow.
Liam Vance, having finally laid his sister to rest in the small cemetery overlooking the Sound, found a new purpose rising from the ashes of his grief. He sold the small house he had lived in for 18 years, a house that had become a shrine to his vigil, and used the money to create a grant in Eleanor's name at the Port Fathom Historical Society. The grant's purpose was to fund the complete digitization of the archives, to ensure that no more history, no more truth could ever be lost to fading ink or administrative neglect. He began volunteering there himself, finding a strange and unexpected peace in the scent of old paper and the ordered silence of the stacks, the same world that had given his sister so much quiet joy. He was no longer just the keeper of her memory. He was the guardian of her work. He was finishing what she started. One crisp autumn afternoon, while walking one of the forest trails near the town, he heard a familiar, scolding cry. He looked up and saw a Steller's jay, a flash of defiant blue against the gray sky, watching him from the branch of a pine. He no longer felt a shiver of dread. He felt a sense of quiet companionship. It was just a bird, a common bird with a loud voice, but it was also a sentinel, a trickster, a survivor. It was an echo of a feather that had solved a murder and brought a sister home. It was a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked detail has a story to tell, if only someone is patient enough to listen. And in telling her story, we honor the meticulous life of Eleanor Vance, and we make sure no name stays forgotten. The story of Eleanor Vance is a quiet testament to the idea that the truth, no matter how long it's buried, will always find a way to the surface, sometimes on the back of something as small and as easily dismissed as a single feather. Her dedication as a keeper of history ultimately solved her own murder, a final, poignant act of a life lived in service of the facts. What are your thoughts on this incredible case? Do you believe a small detail, overlooked by everyone else, can hold the key to a great mystery? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching Unfound. We are committed to uncovering the stories that were meant to be forgotten, because we believe every life has value and every name deserves to be remembered. If you feel the same, don't forget to subscribe to Unfound and hit the notification bell so you never miss a case. We'll see you in the next one.